the exit from ECOWAS would be much worse than the sanctions in terms of the hardship that it would place the citizens of these three countries. So we don't wish it upon them. We don't want to see that.
One after another, African countries are leaving ECOWAS, the economic community of the West African states. That's because it's considered a West puppet put in place to ensure that African countries align with Western interests. Earlier, only a few people knew about that, but after ECOWAS threatened to invade Niger and put sanctions, things became clear. ECOWAS was never made for African countries' welfare but to control them. Therefore, as more crises surfaced, like the ongoing ones in Senegal, ECOWAS has lost its value and is proving useless. No one is ready to hear it, and that's concerning. As a result, ECOWAS just called an emergency session where it tried to appease bold nations like Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, and a new nation, Senegal. But what exactly was discussed and decided in this session that can change many things? Let's find out. The biggest reason for calling for an emergency ECOWAS session is the crisis erupting in Senegal that has the potential to turn into a civil war. And that's disturbing for all the stakeholders in Africa and the loyal leadership of Africa in general. But what has gone wrong in Senegal in the first place? Just a few days ago, the Senegalese parliament voted to delay the nation's presidential election until December 15, 2024, amidst a chaotic voting process that unfolded after security forces intervened to break up an opposition attempt to block the vote, forcibly removing those lawmakers from the legislative building. One of the provisions of the election delay bill, approved by the National Assembly, extended President Macky Sall's term, which is initially set to end on April 2nd until the new election is held. Sall had announced in July that he would not seek a third term in office, but things have changed now, and nobody actually knows what he plans to do next. However, delaying elections is not hinting toward a progressive road. The African Union had urged the Senegalese government to organize the election as soon as possible, and urged opposition candidates to resolve any political disputes through consultation, understanding, and civilized dialogue. But the president did nothing, and we saw protests erupt outside the parliamentary building. Security forces deployed tear gas while protesters ignited tires, blocked roads, and chanted, "Macky Sall dictator." Several individuals were arrested, including two opposition candidates, including former Prime Minister Aminata Touré, who were later released.
A deceptive calm is more like it, an eerie calm, because it's broken, this silence, by the sound of tear gas. Look behind me, on every street corner, there is billowing like smoke, and protesters have shut down every street corner where we are. And we're seeing security forces really overrun, at least in this neighborhood. We're just a block away from where the gathering was supposed to take place, what was supposed to be a peaceful demonstration against the move by President Macky Sall, as you explained it, to delay the elections. But look at the state of affairs now in what is normally one of the most stable democracies in the region.
Senegal's political stability had been fragile for nearly a year after authorities cut internet access in June 2023, when supporters of a disqualified opposition leader clashed with security forces. This marked the first instance in Senegal's history that a presidential election had been postponed. Opposition leaders condemned Sall's delay as a coup. Senegal has often been praised for its stability in the West African region. It has not experienced a coup since gaining independence from France in the 1960s. Nonetheless, reactions to the recent protests have not instilled confidence in the country's ability to maintain political and economic stability. Senegal's sovereign dollar bonds have plummeted sharply. What's more, the Senegalese government also restricted mobile internet access. The private Walf television network, whose signal was disrupted during coverage of protests, reported that its broadcasting license had been revoked. All this points toward a crisis in the making that can easily make the conflict a bloody one that cannot be controlled. Amnesty International said that the government's sudden restriction of internet access via mobile data and Walf TV's broadcasting clearly violated the right to freedom of expression and press rights protected by Senegal's constitution. The Ministry of Communication, Telecommunications, and Digital Economy defended the decision, attributing the shutdown of mobile internet services on Monday to the dissemination of several hateful and subversive messages relayed on social networks in the context of threats and disturbances to public order. Moreover, Human Rights Watch cautioned Senegal about the risk of losing its democratic label. Senegal has long been considered a beacon of democracy in the region. This is now at risk, they remarked in a statement. Now, authorities must take action to prevent violence, rein in abusive security forces, and cease their assault on opposition and media. They should uphold freedom of speech, expression, and assembly and restore internet access, thus steering Senegal back onto its democratic path. The United States and the European Union have urged the government to revert to the original election schedule. However, Senegal appears in no mood to listen to anyone's advice, as its foreign minister said.
The president has initiated a dialogue. The situation doesn't require external intervention from ECOWAS, AU, or other bodies.
Sall stated that he postponed the election due to a dispute between Parliament and the Constitutional Council over potential candidates disqualified from running and concerns about a resurgence of unrest seen in 2021 and 2023. Parliament endorsed Sall's postponement of the election until December 15th, but only after security forces forcibly entered Parliament and detained some opposition lawmakers. The decision paved the way for Sall to remain in office until his successor is likely to be installed in 2025. Senegal's opposition has criticized the move as a constitutional coup and suspects it is part of a plan by the presidential camp to prolong Sall's tenure despite his repeated statements that he would not seek re-election. Sall, who has been in power since 2012, is now seeking a resolution to the turmoil. Media reports have suggested the possibility of a new dialogue with the opposition, including anti-establishment figure Ousmane Sonko, who clashed with the state for over 2 years before being imprisoned last year. Some have proposed granting amnesty to Sonko, his imprisoned deputy Bassirou Diomaye Faye, and individuals detained during unrest in 2021 and 2023. The government has not responded to these reports. However, all this is proving deadly for Senegal in general. Senegal's 8 public universities began a 2-day strike to protest the death of a student during Friday's unrest in the northern city of Saint-Louis, according to the main higher education union. Meanwhile, Human Rights Watch reported that at least 271 people were arrested on Friday and Saturday. Former Presidents Abdou Diouf and Abdoulaye Wade urged Sall to promptly organize the national dialogue he has announced, in a letter sent to AFP attributed to the former leaders. They also called on youths to immediately cease the violence. It's because violence has resulted in deaths, where recently a 23-year-old man died after being shot during clashes in the capital, Dakar. Additionally, a 22-year-old student died on Friday in the northern town of Saint-Louis under circumstances that remain unclear. But how have protests converted into deadly fights that can spill over and threaten the entire region? Well, anger has escalated since President Sall postponed the presidential election scheduled for February 25 until December, just hours before official campaigning was set to commence. Protests erupted across the country on Friday, with police employing tear gas to disperse crowds from a main central square in Dakar, and also closing main roads, rail lines, and major markets. Reporters Without Borders reported that police in Dakar targeted at least 5 journalists. The postponement has drawn criticism from the United States and the European Union. Senegal's parliament supported the decision after security forces forcibly entered the chamber and removed some opposition deputies. The crisis has raised doubts about the West African country's reputation for democratic stability in a region plagued by military coups. Senegal appears to be in the midst of an identity crisis. Its citizens take pride in being viewed as one of West Africa's most stable democracies, and many are furious that this standing is now in jeopardy. "We feel betrayed by Macky Sall," declare a group of imams gathering in a mosque in the capital, Dakar, discussing the political turmoil that swept the country a week ago when MPs backed President Sall's decision to postpone this month's presidential election until December. "The president needs to rethink this. It's unacceptable," explains Ismail Ndiaye, the General Secretary of Senegal's League of Imams. He said that this had never happened before. Senegal has never faced a delayed presidential election. We feel betrayed. We feel misunderstood. So, what has ECOWAS done to resolve this conflict? Well, ECOWAS is trying to be the center of the spotlight by resolving conflicts. It called an emergency session which was focused on African unity, which was more like begging the withdrawing nations not to quit. Foreign ministers from West African nations gathered in Abuja, Nigeria's capital, to ease tensions among countries governed by military regimes that have seized power. ECOWAS was of the view that the postponement of elections in Senegal and the decisions made by junta-led Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger to withdraw from the regional bloc ECOWAS have strained unity in West Africa. Leaders of the Economic Community of West African States emphasized on Friday the urgent need for diplomacy and solidarity in addressing regional challenges. Yusuf Tugar, Nigeria's foreign minister and chair of the talks, stated that leaders must build upon the progress made in this session and continue their efforts to engage with the affected member states with a spirit of cooperation and reconciliation. The meeting followed Senegalese President Macky Sall's decision to postpone the presidential election slated for February 25th, indefinitely due to disputes over the list of candidates. Additionally, in late January, military leaders of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger jointly announced their intention to withdraw from ECOWAS, despite calls from the bloc to restore constitutional order. This made ECOWAS appear as a bloc that is losing all leverage and influence in the region. Therefore, now ECOWAS is trying to use fear as a means to get the withdrawing members back. But it's less likely that this will ever work. On that, the UN has shown concerns, but it appears that the UN also wants Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso not to exit ECOWAS.
These countries definitively withdraw from ECOWAS. This has a potential to further exacerbate the challenges that these three countries and the sub-region are facing, notably in the socioeconomic and security fields.
That's when it becomes quite shady. Why would the United Nations want them not to exit? Well, the answer is simple. If they exited, ECOWAS would have no power over these countries, and it would make it difficult for the West to control them. Nigerian Foreign Minister Tugar warned that if these three nations depart from the 15-member regional economic bloc, their exit would not only inflict hardship on their citizens but also undermine efforts towards regional integration. But it has to be asked that, if ECOWAS cared so much about the citizens, why did it put sanctions on these countries on the West's orders? Perhaps ECOWAS has no answers to this. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. The emergency session addressed terrorism, as well as regional integration and diplomacy. The regional bloc declared its decision to activate a standby force to combat the existential threat of terrorism looming over the community, including Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. It also urged Senegal to stick to its election timetable, but it's less likely that these orders would be followed because ECOWAS has lost its value and become weaker than ever. The ECOWAS region, initially formed to function as a self-sufficient trading bloc, has faced turmoil since last year due to the coup in Niger. Sanctions imposed by ECOWAS prevented goods from being imported into Niger, one of the world's poorest countries. ECOWAS has also urged Senegal, one of its most stable member states, to adhere to its election timetable, but critics have already questioned the group's influence over increasingly defiant member states. The turmoil has also raised doubts about the broader role of the almost 50-year-old bloc, particularly after its warning of military intervention in Niger last year failed to lead to progress toward restoring the country's toppled president. Senegal's troubles represent a new crisis ECOWAS doesn't need, according to Beninese political consultant Jidenu Steve Kpoton. Its powerlessness in the face of the situation is evident. Other analysts expressed confidence in the bloc's ability to address regional issues through mediation in the long term. However, with its reputation at stake, ECOWAS's response to the latest political upheaval in Senegal is being closely monitored. In a statement released late Tuesday, ECOWAS warned Senegal against jeopardizing peace and stability during challenging times for West Africa. However, it remained unclear what steps the bloc would take if President Sall ignored its warning. One option available to ECOWAS is the imposition of trade sanctions, as seen in its actions against Mali and Niger after recent coups. Yet these sanctions have had significant repercussions on citizens, while military regimes continue to maintain control. Experts also suggest that Senegal is not yet at a stage where ECOWAS is likely to impose financial penalties. At this point, sanctions aren't practical, said Idayat Hassan of the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a Washington, D.C.-based think tank, in an interview with AFP. What's more viable is increased mediation, she said, expressing confidence in the bloc's capability to engage in behind-the-scenes diplomacy. ECOWAS is grappling with challenges, but this isn't new, she said, underlining the importance of taking a long-term perspective on the organization formed in 1975. West Africa was once one of the most coup-prone regions globally before the onset of democratic consolidation. While Hassan acknowledged a recent positive shift, she contended that ECOWAS had demonstrated its adaptability, resilience, and capacity to confront most of these challenges. But what about ECOWAS's role? Has it failed in Senegal's matter? Senegal is not ready to take advice from anyone, not even ECOWAS. The statement by the Senegal foreign minister, asserting that Senegal does not require external bodies like ECOWAS to dictate its actions concerning the postponement of the presidential election, suggests a belief in Senegal's sovereignty and ability to manage its internal affairs independently. This position highlights Senegal's autonomy and self-determination, emphasizing its authority to make decisions for its own interests and stability without external interference. But this does not mean what Senegal is doing is right. The debate is about what power ECOWAS has over Senegal to resolve the conflict peacefully. ECOWAS, as a regional organization, aims to promote peace, stability, and democratic governance among its member states. Senegal's open defiance of ECOWAS recommendations explicitly undermines the organization's credibility and perceived effectiveness in fulfilling its objectives. This disagreement could weaken ECOWAS's capacity to enforce its policies and uphold its principles across the region. It may also raise questions about ECOWAS's efficacy in mediating conflicts and sustaining harmony among its member states. This perception of diminished authority could diminish ECOWAS's standing as a regional institution and its ability to influence political developments in West Africa. Earlier, ECOWAS attempted to intervene in the internal affairs of member states such as Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. These interventions ended up causing resentment and eventually led these countries to withdraw from ECOWAS. Now, Senegal's current assertive stance against ECOWAS interference in its domestic matters reflects a broader sentiment of sovereignty and self-determination. By asserting its autonomy to manage internal affairs independently, Senegal demonstrates its willingness to protect national interests. This assertion challenges the perceived authority of regional bodies like ECOWAS to dictate member states' actions. The implications of Senegal's call for non-interference from ECOWAS are significant for the organization's unity and effectiveness. If Senegal were to follow the path of other dissenting member states and leave ECOWAS, it would weaken the organization's unity and influence. Additionally, it could set a precedent for other member states to consider leaving ECOWAS if they feel their sovereignty is under threat. ECOWAS's response to Senegal's stance, as demonstrated by the emergency session it called, acknowledges the seriousness of the situation. This session underscores the need to address the current crisis promptly to prevent further fragmentation and maintain ECOWAS's integrity. It offers a platform for member states to engage in dialogue and find solutions to the challenges facing the organization. The argument also suggests that continued dissent and potential exits by member states could ultimately lead to the dissolution of ECOWAS. If the organization fails to address internal conflicts and maintain cohesion, it risks losing relevance and credibility in the region. The dissolution of ECOWAS would have significant implications for regional cooperation, stability, and development in West Africa. Perhaps that's the time ECOWAS should think about what its objectives are. It was created for mutual development, but it became the West's puppet and started interfering, with political motives, with Western orders. Before Niger's coup, ECOWAS was acting as expected, ensuring trade between the members and promoting mutual growth. However, when France and the European Union offered their support, the ECOWAS chair, who is the president of Nigeria, decided to make ECOWAS a political forum. And that's when things started to get out of hand. Now, ECOWAS should review its role and give precedence to economic cooperation over involvement in the internal affairs of member states. This is because of the recent withdrawals of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso from ECOWAS, alongside Senegal's defiance of ECOWAS's directives. All this should be a lesson for ECOWAS, and especially its chair, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, who likes to please the West. The departures of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso from ECOWAS signify dissatisfaction among member states with the organization's governance strategy. Instead of fostering stability and democratic governance, ECOWAS interventions have often incited resentment and political unrest in these countries. This pattern implies that ECOWAS's attempts to influence internal affairs could be counterproductive, leading to member states withdrawing their participation. Furthermore, Senegal's rejection of ECOWAS advice highlights the organization's diminishing influence and authority. Senegal's assertion of its sovereignty in managing internal affairs reflects a widespread sentiment among member states that ECOWAS's interference is unwelcome. If ECOWAS persists in intervening against member countries' wishes, it risks further alienation and erosion of support. What do you think? Can ECOWAS regain its glory in Africa? Or has it lost all respect it earlier had by explicitly becoming a West's puppet on Niger's coup matter? In the comment section right below, let us know how you see the dynamics changing in Africa and the rising conflicts. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.